Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on steering through the data, understanding and using the Crash Modification Factors Clearinghouse. My name is Karen Scurry, and I'm with Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety. We launched the CMF Clearinghouse just about 3 years ago to date, with the primary purpose to assemble all available crash modification factors into one central location, sort of a one-stop shopping for countermeasure effectiveness data. Not only did we want to provide the CMFs for our users, but we also wanted to provide information and education on how to use CMFs. We do this by providing links to other CMF resources and answers to frequently asked questions. So today's webinar is just another mechanism to provide education on how to use CMFs. The number of CMFs in the clearinghouse have more than doubled since the inception of the clearinghouse 3 years ago, and we're often asked questions like, how do I know which CMF to pick, or how do I know which CMF is most appropriate for my scenario? So today's webinar, Daniel Carter with the University of North Carolina's Highway Safety Research Center is going to walk you through the ins and outs of the CMF Clearinghouse. He'll explain where we get the information to populate the CMF Clearinghouse, as well as how to search and interpret the results. And then we'll have Sean Troy from the North Carolina DOT jump on to show you how North Carolina DOT uses the CMF Clearinghouse to support their safety management activities. And then lastly, Daniel will conclude today's webinar with a couple of demonstrations, some based on requests we received from several of you, so thank you for that. It's always helpful to see how folks are using the CMF Clearinghouse. So before I turn it over to Daniel, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. I guess first and most important is if for some reason your computer or web browser freezes during the webinar, don't panic. Just reload the website and log back into the program. You should be able to just rejoin the session. If you're new to GoToMeeting like myself, you might want to look for the control box in the upper right corner of your screen. If you see a red arrow, that red arrow lets you collapse and expand the control box. We are expecting a large number of attendees today. I think we're just over 200 right now. So everyone is in listen-only mode. This means that you will not be able to speak during the webinar, or you can speak, we just won't be able to hear you. And then if you have any questions, you can enter them in the chat box area within the control box. So if you have a problem during the webinar, this is how you can communicate with us. We'll monitor these questions throughout the webinar and respond as best we can. You can also enter questions related to the presentation in the chat box at any time during the webinar. However, these questions will likely not be addressed during the webinar. We do, however, intend to compile these questions and respond to them in a question and answer format that will be distributed after the webinar and posted on the CMF Clearinghouse website for future reference. One final note before I turn it over to Daniel, we are recording today's webinar and do plan to make that recording available also on the CMF Clearinghouse website. We'll provide additional details on this and how you will obtain your CEU credits at the conclusion of today's session. That's just a little incentive to hang on until the end. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Daniel Carter. Daniel?
All right. Thank you, Karen. Well, welcome to all of you. Thanks for taking some time today to listen here and go through some of the basic and the more advanced features of the CMF Clearinghouse, and I hope that this will be a beneficial thing, that you'll come away with some additional knowledge of how to use this resource to suit whatever position that you're working in and to assist you in finding those quantitative measures of safety for the various treatments and countermeasures that you're looking and implementing on the roads. I wanted to start in a very basic sense. I know that, well, at least I assume that a lot of our attendees today are probably related to the engineering field, maybe working in the safety arena, but I do know that we do have other types of folks joining us who may be more or less familiar with the topic, and I just kind of want to lay some groundwork just so we all are on the same page. So let us start. What is a crash modification factor? What we're talking about here, a CMF, is basically a multiplicative factor. It is a number, and that indicates the proportion of crashes that you would expect after implementing some kind of countermeasure, some kind of safety treatment. So what you'll see is a very basic example here is a CMF of 0.8, and this would indicate if you implemented whatever treatment that's associated with, you would see a decrease in crashes. You would then have 0.8. You would multiply whatever crashes that you expected to have without that treatment. You would multiply those by 0.8. And so you'd be seeing 80%. You would expect to see 80% of the crashes in the future that you had been seeing. Wanted to mention the difference between CRF and CMF. CRF stands for crash reduction factor. Definitely a term that is familiar to a lot of people and has been one that's been used more traditionally and in past years. The move to CMF, crash modification factor, was largely instigated by the release of the Highway Safety Manual that used CMF, and thus we used it as well in the CMF Clearinghouse. But crash reduction factor is a percentage, and they are analogous to each other. So if you had a crash reduction factor of 20% indicating that you expected to see a 20% decrease in crashes, that's analogous to a crash modification factor of 0.8. So you can go back and forth between the two of them. They are indicating the same thing, just in two different ways. And we do include both of those. We do list both of those on any result from the CMF Clearinghouse. So what is the purpose of a CMF? If you are new to this subject, why is this of interest to you? So as I mentioned, the purpose of the CMF basically is to estimate the number of crashes you'd expect after implementing some countermeasure. And this can be used in a number of ways. Obviously, many agencies are trying to squeeze the most out of every safety dollar, and so you're interested in capturing the greatest gain with your limited funding. So you're probably interested in looking at the most cost-effective strategies, looking at the most cost-effective locations, where should you be implementing your treatments. You might be looking at various alternatives for whatever scenario you're dealing with, whatever kind of design scenario, or retrofitting some facility with some safety treatments, and looking at the various safety consequences. And so that is one of the advantages of having CMFs, good CMFs, is that it's a quantitative estimate of what those various alternatives would be expected to do to the crash record at that site. In past years, before research had produced enough quantitative CMFs, then estimating what kind of safety consequences you would have would be based on personal experience, or some kind of knowledge within your agency, or some assumed values. And so that's one of the big advantages of having this type of clearinghouse, this type of database, is that quantitative knowledge based on actual research studies. You might be looking to compare results from analyses that you're undertaking with existing knowledge, with existing CMFs, to see, is what you're getting reasonable? Is it in the ballpark of what is known out there in the field? And you also might be doing cost-benefit analyses and wanting to check the validity of certain assumptions in those. So there's a number of ways that CMFs might be of use to your agency. Just want to lay that out there. I also want to mention the scope of what we're talking about here when we talk about CMFs specifically to the CMF Clearinghouse, and just kind of make sure everyone knows where we're coming from. This is focused, obviously, on studies that conducted research using crashes as the measure of safety, obviously for a crash modification factor. So that's the first bullet there. Crash-based studies, crash-based CMFs are what we're including, not those studies that use other measures such as changes in speed or other types of things about driver behavior or yielding, or any other kinds of measures of safety that you might use in a safety study. What we're involving here is strictly crash-based, which is the same criteria that the Highway Safety Manual uses as well. So we are, if you're not familiar with the Highway Safety Manual, it is a good resource, and we are tied in with them. And in fact, these CMFs that are included in the HSM are included on the CMF Clearinghouse as well. The second bullet there focused on infrastructure characteristics or modifications. So I put in parentheses engineering, things that a DOT would typically be within its jurisdiction. So looking at modifications to the road, to signs, signals, markings, not looking at safety treatments that would be related to enforcement campaigns, media, public awareness of various safety topics, not within the scope of what we're talking about here. We are focused on infrastructure. And then those last two bullets I wanted to mention because it applies to when we go out and look for studies to include, look for CMFs to include in the clearinghouse. We have criteria for what we're going to include, and those first two bullets are obviously two of the big ones. But we are also looking to only involve those studies which produce a CMF. Basically, we're not going to take studies that are doing more of a what you might call an academic exercise of model comparisons or such. We're really looking for studies that are focused on producing a CMF for a particular topic, particular treatment. And then the last one there is we are only including CMFs that were explicitly reported by the author. And so we're not going to be deriving CMFs from someone's work, but we're really going to just report what they reported. And you'll kind of hear that as we go through here. What we are is a clearinghouse. We are bringing to you the knowledge, the published CMFs that are out there, but we're not doing derivations and combinations of CMFs. We're simply going to present what the author presented. And sometimes that means that there may be a lot of results from one study, and some of them may have more or less detail to them. We are sort of at the mercy of what the study author reported, and so that's what we'll be including here on the clearinghouse. I mentioned already about the HSM and wanted to bring that in again to talk about the sources of the CMFs that we have in our database. When we launched this in late 2009, we initially populated the CMF with the CMF Clearinghouse with a couple of broad knowledge bases that were out there already to get a good number of CMFs in at the beginning. One of those was the Highway Safety Manual knowledge document, which was the compiled knowledge as they were still working on releasing, preparing and finalizing the HSM first edition, which was released in spring of 2010. And so we involved those CMFs that they had compiled for that document. There was a fair number there. And then also the FHWA Desktop Reference Guide for Crash Reduction Factors. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with that. And we included the CRFs, as that one calls them, in the clearinghouse as well. So those are some of our first compilations that we pulled in to sort of be the seed of the database. From there, and since that time when we launched, we undergo a regular review process where we look for studies that fit those criteria that I outlined. And so I've listed some of our sources, some of our main sources there. Every year after the TRB Transportation Research Board annual meeting, we get those papers that were submitted and presented at that meeting and go through those and find the ones that are eligible and have CMFs we could use. We do regular searches of professional journals, the ASCE, ITE journals, as well as several others, Accident Analysis and Prevention, Journal of Safety Research, there's a few other ones we go through on a regular basis to see what might be published in there. Once a year, we do an open TRID search, the Transportation Research Information Database, if I got that acronym correct, to see basically what else did we miss that we didn't find from either TRB or the professional journals. And so it's more of an open internet search for other research that may fit our criteria and have CMFs that we would want to include. State research reports. Various state DOTs do internal research throughout the year on efforts that they've undergone, treatments they've put in place, and they're doing evaluations perhaps, or maybe partnering with the university to do evaluations of some of the treatments they've done. And so at times we'll get state research reports, and we'll pull those in and include those CMFs and give them ratings. And then also user-submitted studies. Those that are submitted by our user base, those who visit the CMF Clearinghouse and perhaps have a study that they've done where they produce CMFs. We have a mechanism where they can submit those studies to us, and we'll put them through the review process and include them on the clearinghouse. So that's a plug for any of you who do CMF research that are producing CMFs. Please submit them to us. It may be the case if you've published them before, maybe we've got them already, but we'd love to have more added to it. So please avail yourself of that. I've alluded to the review process that we go through, and I just want to talk a little bit about that, exactly what that is. So Our process that we go through, we want to gather, our purpose is to gather details about the studies and about the CMFs that those studies produce. And then our second step is to evaluate the quality and determine if it is in the clearinghouse, what's going to be the quality of that. And we indicate that by way of a star quality rating that I'll show in a little bit here. So the first step we go through is a preliminary review. We go through those criteria, determine if the study is eligible for the clearinghouse. In doing so, if the study is eligible, we will gather the data about the study, so all the details, whatever the study author reported to us. So that would be things like what state or cities did the researchers study, what sites, where were the sites located, how many years of data, how many locations did they study, what type of study methodology did they use, some of these other details that we can include. And about the CMF specifically, was that CMF for all crashes? Was it just for fatal? Was it just for angle? What type of roadway did they study? Was it a two-lane rural road or a freeway? What crash severity? What other details about the area type maybe? So whatever the author reports, we can include as details about that CMF. And then we undergo a critical review. A couple of our team members are well-versed in statistical methods for developing CMFs, have a lot of experience there, and so they go through and examine each of the CMFs, look at the data that we've collected about them, and establish a star quality rating for each CMF. And the purpose of doing this was basically, if we're going to be a clearinghouse and include and put out there all the CMFs that we can find, we wanted to assist the practitioners, the users out there in knowing, okay, I see these CMFs, but is one more reliable than the other? Which one is the one I should go with, or which one is based on a really good study as opposed to a poor study? And so that's what the star quality rating is all about. It's a structured process that we go through, but it's good to point out that there are definitely subjective areas within that. You'll see as I talk about these various areas that we go through. It produces a star rating, so every one of our CMFs will get a star rating, and it's 1 through 5 stars. 5 stars is the best. It's the most reliable, the highest quality CMF, if you will. We thought it good to mention what the star quality rating is and what it isn't. So it is an indication of the quality of the CMF. That is the reliability, how much you could, how much stock you could put in. Is it based on a good study, a lot of data? What it is not an indication of the effectiveness of the treatment. It is not an indication of the fact that this particular treatment is very good at decreasing crashes as opposed to not very good at decreasing crashes. You see that in the value of the CMF. If it is a 0.9, CMF of 0.9, that indicates a slight decrease in crashes, 10% decrease in crashes. If it's a CMF of 0.25, that indicates a pretty steep decrease. It's 75% decrease in crashes. So that's where you see the effectiveness of any CMF. So the 5 criteria that we look at for the star rating are listed there, 1 through 5. And for each of these areas, we rate them in terms of excellent, fair, or poor. So the first one there, study design. There are a number of ways you can conduct an evaluation of a treatment. If you implemented something, let's say, increased retroreflectivity, increased brightness of stop signs, and you did that on a number of sites in a particular area, you could evaluate that in a number of different ways. And basically, you can do a before-after study. There are various ways of doing before-after studies. You could also do cross-sectional studies where you look at many different types of intersections, both with and without the increased brightness. So there's several different ways of doing that, and that is what comes into the study design score. Essentially, the before-after, the empirical base before-after, if you're familiar with that, is pretty much the top of what we consider the most reliable study design that you could do to decrease the possible biases. Number 2, sample size. So basically looking at did it involve a large number of sites and that had a large number of crashes that would give you a good statistical read on the effectiveness of the treatment. Number 3, standard error is a statistical way of measuring the accuracy, if you will, of the CMF value. If there is a small standard error, then it's a fairly high reliability that CMF is pretty close to what it indicates. If it's a large standard error, that means there's a lot of variability and it's not as reliable in looking at that value. So that's what we rate there. Potential bias, basically, did the reviewers note any potential bias in the study? Did they neglect to account for various things, variations in traffic volume, or other biases that are known to the safety field, such as regression to the mean and some of these other things? Did they account for those? And then the fifth data source is basically, did the study just look at sites in, let's say, one area of one city, or did they involve multiple cities across multiple states with some good diversity of sites there? So if they did have a good diversity, well spread set of sites, that's excellent. And if it was just a few sites in one area, then that's poor. So just to give you an idea of the various things that we look at. Okay, well let's move on to the clearinghouse. I do want to kind of make this a live show, so to speak. So I want to just talk about some of the features that we offer on the website. And first, I want to mention, of course, any database is only as good as finding the information in it. So we have a quick search feature and an advanced search feature. And I'm going to go ahead and flip on over here. We'll go back to the clearinghouse front page. What we've got on the front page of the CMF Clearinghouse, and if you have not visited there, cmfclearinghouse.org. The quick search is visible on the left side. You can enter your search terms there for whatever it is you may be looking for. We've got a few criteria under that by which you can narrow your search if you know specifically what kind of maybe a category that you're looking in. We've got a number of different categories: access management, alignment, lighting, pedestrians and bicyclists, roadside, these different categories. You can also narrow your search to search only particular crash types. If you know you're only interested in angle crashes, you can search to just find CMFs having to do with angle crashes. Crash severity, if you know that you're only interested in seeing what the effect on fatal crashes is, perhaps, you can look specifically for those. And then roadway type, if you have a specific type of roadway that you're looking at, you can also search according to that. The other thing that you can use is the advanced search, which you can access by clicking advanced search here, or the Find CMFs link up in the upper navigation bar. What you'll find there is a similar type of search mechanism, but one that is more full-featured. It does have the search term box where you can enter whatever search terms you may be looking for, maybe left turn, maybe rumble strips, whatever it may be. And then below that is basically a way that you can more finely tailor your search. You can determine what the search terms would be applying to. You're just searching within a countermeasure name. Are you maybe looking in a study citation? Maybe if you're looking for a specific author, you might be searching there. It gives you some of the same criteria that you saw in the quick search, such as filtering down by category. Has other things, such as you only want to see CMFs that are of a particular star rating, maybe 3 and above. So you would select 3 here. Gives you that option. It does give you the option of including or not including those that are in the HSM first edition, if you're interested in comparing to that. And then a bunch of other criteria that have to do with the situation that you may be looking at: crash types, crash severities, roadway type. If you have intersections that you're interested in, narrowing down by the types of intersections, other such things. So you can kind of look at that to see if that would help you narrow down your search. The second bullet there about search terms, I did want to mention a lot of people are using search terms to try to hone in on exactly what they want to find. And there's 3 basic options you have, and I'll go back to the advanced search, which is where these exist. The pull down there shows that you can match all the words, any of these words, or the exact phrase. And I just kind of wanted to talk about exactly what that means. And basically this is a way to try to assist you as you're searching and trying to get to exactly what you're looking for. So if I were to enter, let's say, a search term, left turn lane, okay, and I'm going to leave it on the default setting, which is match all of these words. It does tell me that it's going to tell me that I need to search within something. I'm looking at countermeasure name. I want to see countermeasures that specifically say something about left turn lane. So I'm going to click back in here and hit enter. I could have scrolled to the bottom and hit submit. This is the search results that you would see when anytime you do a search, you're going to come to this page. It's going to tell you at the top how many CMFs with star ratings matched your search. I got 106 here. Below that, it's going to have the CMFs collapsed up into categories. And so these are expanding, collapsing sort of view here that you can sort down through. I'll be going through that in a bit, but I just wanted to stop right here at the beginning of the advanced search results and show you the effect of doing these in different ways. So I searched for matching all of these words, which meant that these search results will have all three words in their title, so left, turn, and lane. If I go back by clicking Modify My Search and I say, excuse me, go back here, left, turn, lane, if I instead go with match any of these words, that's a more open search, which means it's going to return anything that has a countermeasure name that involves either left or turn or lane, which you can imagine is going to be pretty significant, especially with the word lane in there being very common. So it's going to crank. I'm going to let that come up with the search results. If you recall, we had 106 the first time. So now I've got almost 600 CMFs returned. Obviously, a much more open search. It's returning anything that has a countermeasure involving any of those three words. That may be good if you are not exactly sure of what you're looking for. Maybe you're kind of getting into more of an open search where you just want to see what's out there, and so you're okay with a broader search. That may be something that appeals to you. If you wanted a more honed-in search, then you would maybe just select matching all of those words. And we have an option there also of matching the exact phrase. They'll tell you if you didn't click on something down here, you're entering search terms, it does say, tell me what you want me to search in. So I'm going to say countermeasure name again just to be consistent. And now I'm seeing 39 results. So it's a much more honed down search because it's only returning those CMFs that have a countermeasure name that says exactly left turn lane. That may be important to you if you're searching for something that has a very specific name, or it may not. But those are the options that you have when you're using search terms. I want to mention about blank searches. I know just from looking at the results and sort of looking at the search database, what's gone through, a lot of people are using these, but I want to make sure that people know you can enter nothing in the search term box and instigate a blank search. This may be useful to you if you want to see everything in a particular category, let's say. So if I wanted to see everything about intersection geometry, any CMF to do with intersection geometry, I'm going to leave that search term blank, and I'm just going to go ahead and enter there and search everything that's within the intersection geometry category. We categorize each of our CMFs, and so it's going to return here 270 CMFs that are all in the intersection geometry category. So I want to let you know that feature is possible. If you didn't narrow it down by the category and you just did a blank search, you would get the entire CMF Clearinghouse database. If that appeals to you, please have at it. Narrowing fields, I've mentioned what those would be used for to narrow down your search, get only specific types of results. I thought it good to clarify something, which is the word all. And I'm going to go back to the home page to the quick search. If I were looking for a particular treatment and I wanted to narrow down by crash type, I only wanted to see some particular types of crashes, the word all appears at the top. And I want to be clear about what that means. That does not mean that it's going to include any CMF that approaches angle or cross median. That's only going to return CMFs that address all crashes or total crashes, if you want to rephrase that. And so I just want to be clear that when you select all there, that's not opening your search up more. It's actually narrowing it down. You're saying, I don't want to see a CMF that only has to do with angle crashes. Leave that out. I'm not concerned with that. I only am concerned with those that address all crashes at a particular location. So I just want to be clear about that. And if you need further clarification, please do send your questions through the chat box, as Karen mentioned at the beginning, and we'll address those and post those answers up following the webinar. Okay, so you've gone through the process of figuring out what you want to search for. You've entered your search terms. You're getting the search results, as I showed you just a minute ago. I want to talk about what you are going to see in the search results and how to use that. So we'll go back here. I'm going to search for the word rumble. If I'm interested in rumble strips, I might be doing that. Sometimes using fewer search terms is a way to go to get a more wide open set of results if that's something you are interested in. So it's going to tell me that it's gotten 4 CMFs with star ratings here. I've collapsed them into the various categories. Some rumble strips have to do with things at the intersection, traffic control. Some are on the roadway, some are on the shoulder, and so it's collapsed those in different categories. You can expand those, and it will show you the list of countermeasures, which is sort of the next level of aggregation there. So I can see that, okay, there are CMFs available for these various countermeasures, centerline and shoulder rumble strips, or just centerline rumble strips. And if I'm interested in centerline rumble strips only, I can click on that and see the CMFs that are available in our Clearinghouse database. We display a certain number of fields in the search results. On the far left is the CMF value, so 0.91 for the first one there in our list. As I mentioned, we also display the CRF, which is that percentage that's been used in past years. And so for 0.91, that indicates a 9% decrease. So that's why the CRF is 9 there. The quality, you see the star quality rating showing up there. This particular CMF was very reliable. It got 5 stars. You can see that the crash type and severity that it would address, that you would apply this to, would be all types of crashes. It would address all crashes, but it would only address those that are fatal, serious injury, or minor injury, or sometimes listed in research reports as fatal plus injury crashes. The roadway type was not specified in this particular report for this CMF. There are some roadway types specified down below. And then the area type here for this one is rural. So it was developed on a rural site. So these are things to be aware of as you're looking at the CMF. And at the end, we give the reference of the particular study that it came from, and that is hyperlinked. So you can click that and pull up the study a little bit later. And actually, I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll come back and look at that in a minute. Question here: why do some CMFs look the same? A lot of folks, when they get into searching, are finding these search results and going, yeah, some of these they look very similar, or maybe they look very similar across the results that I can see. And so if I go down here, I'm looking through these, I can see that some of them are different. This particular one that I've got my cursor on addresses head-on and side swipe crashes, whereas the next one addresses all crashes. So I can see, okay, yeah, that's different there. If I come down here, and I'll put the roads up at the top of the screen if I can get that fine up of control here, I see 2 CMFs, one for 0.89 and one for 0.98. Both of them are 4-star rated. Let's see if I can get a little better view here. Both of them address all crash types, all severities. There's not a specification of the roadway type, and they're both for rural areas. So they seem to be identical, at least in this search results. And that's largely due to the fact that we can only display a certain number of the fields to do with any CMF in the search results. So what you'd want to do is actually go and look at those. If you're interested in these particular CMFs, you're trying to figure out what you're going to be using. You want to go look at those. And so what we're going to do is open them up. If you click on that CMF value, it'll take you to the details page, and you can see all the details that we were able to glean from the research report for this particular CMF. And so as we scroll down, we see the star rating there. We see things about the crash modification factor or the reduction factors. That may be the case. We present both there. If I keep scrolling, we can see that there are certain aspects of the applicability. So what kind of situation is it appropriate for? Where was it developed? I can tell here that it was developed on roads with a number of lanes 2, undivided roads, as it lists there, rural, as we saw in the search results. It gives me the traffic volume range of the roads that were used in the study. If I'm trying to apply this to a road with 30,000 ADT, this may not be appropriate. I might want to keep looking because this was developed for lower volume roadways. You can see there are some fields that we don't necessarily know because they just weren't reported, such as speed limit. And then down below are some of the development details. What is some of the background about the way that this study produced this CMF? They used a range of dates, 97 to 2006. It was developed on sites in Minnesota. It shows about the crashes used in the study and the study type. If I go look at the other CMF that we saw being seemingly identical to this one, if I scroll down and I look at these details, and actually I have to get to the bottom down here to the development details, I can see that this other one, which seemed identical, was actually developed using Pennsylvania data. These are both in the same study, and a lot of times the study will, if they're using multiple states' data, also produce CMFs that are particular to each state individually before they combine and get a combined CMF. And so now that I'm looking at the details, I can tell, okay, the difference between these two is that one was from Minnesota, the other one's from Pennsylvania. If I'm an engineer in Pennsylvania, I might prefer this one because this was developed in my state. It will account for more of the particularities of the way that we do things in Pennsylvania, the way the drivers are, and that sort of thing. So just a plug for looking at the details of the CMFs, and it might require going to the details here and not just looking at what comes up in the search results. I've mentioned about the missing data and how that's dependent on the study author. We include what we can. The Excel output, I wanted to make sure that everyone just knows that we have that capability. And in fact, if you're getting this kind of search results back to the rumble strip example that we used and seeing these many CMFs, you might want to sort of download those. If you're a spreadsheet sort of person, you want to get your hands on it, kind of play around with that data. If you scroll to the bottom, on any search results that you get will be a link for exporting the results to Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that just to give you an example of what that looks like. Okay, so this is what the Excel download looks like. It puts these each CMF in a row, gives you the ID number of that CMF and all the other details about it out to the side, so you can do filtering, sorting, or however you want to try to get down to exactly what you're going to be using. You'll see how this was used in North Carolina in a little bit when Sean Choi comes on to talk about how he's using in his state. Okay, and one more thing I wanted to mention there, the Highway Safety Manual, I mentioned that we include all the CMFs that are in the Highway Safety Manual here on the Clearinghouse. And the way we do that, if I can get back to my screen here, I'm going to scroll up. And on some of these CMFs, if I get to the top, I believe, yeah, right here, this one here, 0.86, has a B and a capital B in brackets next to it. This is an indication that this CMF is in the HSM, and in fact, it has a bold indication. If I click that B, it's going to explain what that means. It says that bold text is used in the HSM for the most reliable CMFs, those that have a standard error of 0.1 or less. This is the way that the HSM indicated reliability, was with some of the display using fonts. And so we also give that indication here for CMFs. So you can see here in the search results which ones are included in the HSM first edition, and the rest are not. Pardon me, too many windows open. All right. Okay, so you've got your search results, and you're now going through the process of, okay, which CMF am I going to use in this particular project or scenario that I'm on? I've mentioned this already, but I wanted to stress it again. There are various factors that you need to look at when you're choosing a CMF. You need to look at the crash type, the severity. If you are interested only in angle crashes being decreased, then you want to look at those that address angle crashes specifically. Facility type, you saw that there are a number of different types of facilities that you could be looking at and our CMFs apply to, whether it's an interstate or other principal arterials or minor collectors, whatever it may be. Be aware of that, and if you come up with a CMF that was developed on a minor road and your situation, you're looking at an interstate, just be aware of that difference, and you'll need to take that into account when you're deciding on which CMF you're going to use. Star rating, of course, we provide the star rating, and I hope that does factor into your decision as a way of indicating which CMFs are more reliable. The search results, if you didn't notice, are structured such that the highest star rated CMFs appear at the top, and it goes down from there to try to help direct you that way. And then there are a host of other things that, as you saw, you can look at to determine which CMF you're going to use, as we saw about the state of origin of those two CMFs may have been a factor. If I was particularly if I was from Pennsylvania or a state near there, that may have been a more important thing. ADT range, I showed you an example of that as well. So keeping in mind that applicability is key. Just simply pulling up a search results of CMFs and going with the top one, going with the highest rated one, may not always be the most appropriate. You need to look at the details and how well that applies to the particular scenario or particular intersection type or roadway type that you're dealing with. There is a Science of CMFs course offered through NHI that Karen will be mentioning at the end of this webinar to give you a little bit more information about that, but they do go more in depth about the applicability and the details of certain CMFs and how do you use those in your scenarios. Okay, well, I'm going to hand it off now to Sean Troy, who's a safety engineer. He's with North Carolina DOT and their safety evaluation group, and he's going to talk about the ways that he uses the CMF Clearinghouse to get data for his state. So just give me just 1 second. Okay, Sean, you should be on, and you can go ahead and share your screen with us and start if you're in.
All right, hopefully you can see it.
Yep, looking good.
All right. Well, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. So basically, I'm going to talk you guys through today on how we use the CMF Clearinghouse to come up with our crash reduction factors here in North Carolina. So basically, I'll give you a little historical perspective. We began using CRFs in the early 2000s to justify projects in our BC ratios. We formed a committee. We reviewed all known research, and we selected CRFs to use on a statewide basis in our 8 regional traffic offices. There's 15 regional traffic engineers within those 8 offices. And basically, who's on the committee? It's basically 5 people out of those 15, and then myself. And why do we do this? Again, back in the early 2000s, basically what would happen is we'd have to put a BC sheet together. Someone from the eastern side of the state may use a CRF that was an 80% reduction, and someone from the western side of the state may use the same CRF for a countermeasure that would be a 60% reduction. And of course, with them using variable CRFs, projects in that eastern part of the state would get funded more so than the western part. So we really wanted a scenario where we could have a fair system, so everybody's using the same data across the state, and that way, when the projects are being compared to each other, it was apples to apples. I think Daniel alluded to this on his previous slides. We're still using CRF. We've been using that since the early 2000s. We have not switched over to the CMF. So a lot of the slides will have CRF on them, and basically CRF is the inverse of the CMF. So one thing I wanted to point out, our CRFs in 2005, we had 36 countermeasures on our available sheet. In 2007, it went to 47. In 2010, there was 112, and in November of 2012, we went to 146. And that huge jump between 2007 and 2010 was basically from the CMF Clearinghouse being put together. As I said before, we used to have to go through and try to find studies, review them, and then make decisions on them as a committee. Now the CMF Clearinghouse gives us a one-stop shop, basically. So how do we select CRFs? So we basically got 2 scenarios that happen. CRF value is requested for a countermeasure where we do not have one currently on our listing. We search the CMF Clearinghouse for quality CMFs. If no quality CMFs exist, then the committee votes on a CRF to use until a value is available in the clearinghouse. And then option 2 is we do a 6-month or a 12-month, and it has been 12 months lately, and we do a mass download of the CMF Clearinghouse. And we basically review the latest CRFs that have been added to the sheet versus what we had looked at before. And I'll kind of walk you through that right now. The first time that you undertake this, it's pretty intense. You know, I think there's maybe 4,000 CRFs on the clearinghouse now. So the first time we did this, it took a little bit of time. But now, if you do it every 6 months or every 12 months, basically all the CRFs are assigned a CMF ID. So whenever I do a recent download, I just need to look at the CRFs that I have not looked at before. And we bring that into through Excel, which is one of the last things that Daniel showed you. We just do a mass download, and again, we just look at the latest CMF IDs that have been added, and then we make a note whether we've reviewed it or whether we're going to add it to our sheet. So in this case, on this page, we added 9 CRFs, and they were all for converting a two-way stop to an all-way stop control. And there was variability within those 9. So 3 of these were taking a two-way stop to an all-way stop that also had flashing beacons. And so some of the things we look at the crash type, we look at that crash severity, we look at the star quality rating, and sometimes you will see multiple values for a countermeasure that have the same star quality rating. We then go into the process of taking the one that has the lowest standard error. And this sheet also gives you the CRF and the CMF, and again, we're still using the CRF, basically just because we haven't changed our calculation spreadsheets yet. So those 3 that I just showed you, this is what it looks like on our CRF sheet that our regional traffic engineers use. So we basically converted over, so if you're doing a 4-way stop installation with overhead flashers, you can use total crashes, or you can use total frontal impact crashes, or you can use total injury crashes. Those were the 3 categories that were available in the crash modification factor clearinghouse. And the reason we say or here is we don't want to be double counting crash reductions within our benefit cost analysis. Prior to these 9 items being added to the sheet, what we had available was always stop installations, and this was a previous study. And basically, we still leave this on the sheet, but we also always replace crash reduction factors if need be. And in this case, the study that was available, 62% of those locations that were in that all-way stop study were on one-way streets. So that was the best available knowledge we had at the time. We felt like it was better than using something pulled out of the air or our gut feel. And now we have available these 9 additional crash reduction factors. So if someone still wants to install a 4-way stop or an all-way stop on a one-way street, those values are still available to them. CRF variability within countermeasures. So I think Daniel kind of hit on this earlier. Let's say that we were wanting to install a left turn lane at an intersection. You have value for without signal, total crashes or total left turn crashes. That is the value that we used for a long time. We basically put this on the sheet in April of 2001. It was from a particular handout that we used, and we referenced that at the back of our list. What we now have available as of 2005 was a new study that came out, and it really broke the data down into 3-leg rural stop, 3-leg urban, 4-leg rural stop, 4-leg urban. So, you know, what we've advised our field engineers to do is pick the CRF that best fits their situation out of the ones that are available here. One of the things we have to deal with is objective versus subjective. And I'm using the railroad crossing values. We recently had the railroad group add their projects to our spot safety process, and so they've had to develop basically benefit cost using crash reduction factors, and there's not a whole lot of crash reduction factors that are available for railroad crossing countermeasures. So what we do as a committee is people will send in requests for a crash reduction factor. We'll see if there are objective measures, and an objective measure would be from the CMF Clearinghouse. If you'll notice on here, these values were added to the warehouse in November of 2009, and we even put the CMF ID reference if we need to go back and reference where that study came from. So we would call these objective countermeasures. And if you look at these next ones that I've highlighted, these all have a star beside them. These are what we call our subjective measures. We have to have a crash reduction factor to be able to move forward with our benefit cost sheet. So let's just take median barriers at a crossing, 11.7. We all voted on that as a committee and had a discussion. Most of the committee goes through the email process. We don't actually meet. And we all decided that based on knowledge that we had of doing this in North Carolina, even though we haven't studied it, we feel like it's a 77% reduction. But we do star that, saying that it is subjective, and if any countermeasures get added to the CMF Clearinghouse that are objective in the future, we will change that out. So we note what's objective in our crash reduction factors, and then we note what is subjective. So with all that being said, the goal for us was basically just to have an accountable and defendable process when we were looking at our projects, and to make sure that everybody was on the same page and everybody was fighting evenly for the minimal safety dollars that we have in this state. We recently updated this list in November 2012. I'll be glad to share the CRF listing with you. We have it in PDF format. I'll also be glad to share the notes file I have from the CMF Clearinghouse. So it's basically all the notes that I make on the download that I get from the CMF Clearinghouse, and then also all the notes that we make on our pre-list before we make our PDF file. You can send me an email for this data, and I'll be glad to send it to you. My email address is at the bottom of this presentation, and what I'd like to tell you is make sure if you type in STROY, make sure that Microsoft does not spell check it to story. That happens a lot, and I never see the email. So make sure it says STROY before you send it. Thanks a lot, Daniel.
All right. Thank you, Sean. Let me grab the screen back from you here. All right. One second while I get situated back here again. All right. I appreciate what you had to say, Sean. I noticed a few things that you were definitely alluding to points I had touched on. Specifically, I noticed you mentioned about, I think it was the left turn lane installation intersections, and showing that you had, since I guess you had first added it to your list, you had seen a report come out that broke it down into different CMFs depending on what kind of intersection, whether it was 3-leg, 4-leg, stop, signalized. And that's certainly one of the things that I wanted to stress about the applicability issue, is that it may be the case that there's enough research where there's not just one CMF value for a certain treatment, like a left turn lane installation. There may be enough knowledge where you've got different CMFs depending on what the kind of intersection is. So always be looking for that sort of thing. One more thing I want to mention about the kind of information we've got on the clearinghouse is the inclusion of details on the study. Before, if you recall, I was looking at, I had searched for rumble strip information, and a lot of the CMFs had this one reference here, report by Darren Torbeck, which was NCHRP report 641. So I clicked on that, and I went to look at the details about that study. And what we do is we list the title and author and give you the abstract and the citation. When possible, we provide a link to the report itself if you want to go in there and look to see what information is available there that maybe we weren't able to include, or some of the discussion about the results or anything else you're interested in. And then you can see below, it'll show all the CMFs that are associated with that study. So at the top here is those centerline rumble strip CMFs that we had been looking at. But if I keep scrolling down, I'll see other, if this particular study studied other types of countermeasures, as they did also centerline rumble strips and horizontal curve. It kind of puts them all in one place so you can see all the CMFs that a particular study had produced and that we included. Well, I thought it would be a good thing to include here in the final half hour of our webinar some demonstration searches to just show if you're going to be undergoing looking through the clearinghouse and looking for CMFs, what would be some of the possibly real-world searches that you'd be doing. So I'm going to start with the left turn lane installation and go to a few other situations from there. Scroll back to the top. My usual method, I guess you could say, is to use the advanced search. It just gives me more control over things. So I'm going to look for left turn lanes, and this is one that we had done before. Looking for left turn lanes in the countermeasure name. I'm going to leave it on matching all of these words because I want countermeasures that are related strictly to this search term. Okay, so I can see there's 106 CMFs that were returned with star ratings. And I'm just going to expand one of those categories. I'm particularly interested in intersection geometry. I want to see what kind of countermeasures might be available under there. And you can see there's quite a number of different ways of adding left turn lanes, different situations that they might have there. And I'm going to go look at one of these, which is providing a left turn on one major road approach. It's one of the countermeasures on here. I'm going to see the results there, the CMFs that are listed there. And so this would be the kind of results I'd look for if I had this kind of situation. I was interested in an intersection where we're just putting left turn lane on one major road approach. I'm going to look and see some of these details here. I see the CMFs are in the 0.7 range, fairly high quality, being 5 stars. These top ones do address all the crashes, all severities. Some are for rural, some are for urban. It looks like most of them came from Harwood's study in 2002. As you can see the little indication there, the brackets, I see that a lot of these are actually in the HSM and are a bold font in the HSM, so fairly high rated there as well. I see these two, the second and the third CMF on the list here. If I look across their data, at least here on the search results, they do appear identical. So I'm maybe interested in looking at those. Maybe I have an urban site, and so I want to go in and look at these specifically. So I'm going to open up this first one that was 0.73 just to see what goes into that. As I look down through here, I'm going to look at probably the applicability section to see if there's something about the roadway types that differ. We see it's urban. I don't know number of lanes or speed limits or anything like that. This is intersection related, so there's going to be some detail here in the intersection area. It's a 4-leg intersection. This was for those intersections that were stop controlled. If I pull up the other one, the 0.76 that was below that, seeming to look identical to it, I'll go down and look through the applicability section as well, looking at the roadway information. And as I get to the part that has to deal with the intersection data, I can see this is also for 4-leg, but it was for those that were signalized. So that's the difference between these two CMFs. One was for stop-controlled intersections, one was for signalized. So if I had a signalized intersection I'm trying to apply this left turn lane at, this would be the one that I would want to go with. I wanted to show you something else that you may encounter as you look through and get results. At the bottom here of this particular countermeasures listing of CMFs, you can see there's 5 there that say cannot be rated HSM, parentheses. And it's got an indication here in the brackets of a little degree sign with a circle. Those are CMFs that are in the Highway Safety Manual, but they did not have an adjusted standard error, which is something that the Highway Safety Manual uses to judge the reliability of the CMFs there. The way that we brought in CMFs from the Highway Safety Manual, we used their adjusted standard error to give us an indication of what the star rating should be. These particular ones did not have one, and so that's why you might see something like that. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention, but they are in Highway Safety Manual, so we did want to include them here on someone's search results. Okay. The next one, I'm going to do another search. Maybe I'm interested in mid-block crossing for pedestrians and some of the treatments that might be done there. If you are familiar, there's a type of signal called well, traditionally, I guess you could say, called a hawk signal, now called a pedestrian hybrid beacon in the latest MUTCD. So I'm actually going to do a search for that to see if there's any CMFs that would be related to a hawk signal. So I'm going to go ahead and just use that and search just in the countermeasure name for anything referring to hawk. I see in the category of pedestrian bicycles, there are 3 CMFs having to do with that, all about this one particular countermeasure, which is the installation of a high-intensity activated crosswalk, pedestrian activated beacon, or vernacularly known as the HAWK signal. So there I can see the search results. There's 3 different CMFs. They're for different situations. The first one is for all crashes, all severities. The second one is only for those that are fatal or serious injury. And the third one has to do with strictly the vehicle to pedestrian crashes. And I actually have a picture of what this looks like if you're not familiar with it. So a HAWK signal is of this configuration, mid-lock crossing. It's a certain type of signal that's activated by a pedestrian to cross the street. So it brings the vehicles to a stop while the pedestrian crosses. So we can see the effect over here, 0.712, so about a 30% decrease for all crashes. And then if we look at the vehicle-pedestrian crashes specifically, it actually brings those crashes down quite a bit more. It's about a 70% decrease for vehicle-pedestrian crashes. I wanted to look at one specifically just to show you something else that may be of interest to you. If I go look at one of those, that first HAWK CMF specifically, you'll see that it's got the star rating. We did review it, had given it a star rating. If you're interested in sort of what made up that star rating, you can view score details that will bring up another window. And so if you see one that doesn't have 5 stars, you can see what exactly about it was not an excellent rating. So this one had a data source score of fair, which is why it ended up with 4 stars as opposed to a 5, which meant it was probably based on a more limited set of intersections, or at least in some way limited. So it was within, it was within one municipality here. We can see it was based on sites strictly within Tucson, Arizona. So if it had been based on multiple states, it would have probably gotten the excellent rating in the data source score, but as it was fair. It had a decent number of sites, but they're all within one city. The other thing I wanted to mention here is at the bottom, we do have comments that sometimes we put in for particular studies. This one just talks a little bit about the fact that the study authors had produced some additional CMFs that they were based on some other data set of crashes, but it didn't include new knowledge. It was sort of in some respect presenting the same sort of thing that this set of CMFs did, and so it's just saying we didn't include that, but you can see the final report for that. So sometimes we'll include some comments there to you that might be useful as you look at using that CMF or knowing more about the study. Back to this bulleted list here. The next one I want to look at was actually one that was submitted. We had asked some folks who registered for the webinar to submit any kind of situation scenario they have where they're trying to use the clearinghouse and wanting me to do sort of a demonstration of what they might be looking at. So we've got one of our webinar participants says that he is looking at a situation where he's got an intersection, which is the main road is a rural 4-lane divided road, a lot of traffic there, and then a 2-lane road intersecting that. It's currently stop controlled, and they're looking for alternatives to signalization. And so they were interested in J-turns. They were interested in applying a J-turn type of configuration to this intersection. And he was asking that he'd done some searches and seen that there was J-turn CMFs in the clearinghouse, but had some concerns about that. And we'll go ahead and look and see what sort of thing he was seeing. So I'm going to go back to the advanced search. I'm going to search for J-turn. I'm going to look in the countermeasure name and see what we come up with here. Okay, so I see we do have CMFs related to that under intersection geometry. And just to show this picture, but just to lay the groundwork, J-turn, this is like a graphic I got from FHWA, one of their reports that was looking at J-turns, and basically a way of taking the intersection and preventing through traffic from the minor road or left turns from the minor road, and instead having those movements go to the right and then make a U-turn and go back through the intersection. So safety treatment there decreased the number of conflict points between vehicle movements. So that's what we're looking at here. So the CMF is under install J-turn intersection. That seems applicable here. That's what we seem to be looking at. But we look at the results of the CMFs, and I'm sure this is what he was talking about. We've got CMFs of 0 for a lot of these, which would indicate a complete elimination of crashes. So the CRF is 100% decrease in crashes. So he was saying, this looks weird. It's not really what I would expect to see. I can't disagree. That would be a little odd, especially if you're talking about all crashes. Maybe if it was for one specific type of crash that you had prevented the movement of with your treatment, that would make sense. But there's a lot of zeros here, and so he was having some problems, trying to involve this and use this in his analysis. One of the things that jumped out at me is that these are all 2-star rated, and they're all from the same study over here, Hochstein from 2009. And so as I look down, I can see, yeah, there's a lot of 2-star rated. I think even as you get farther down, there's a few that are 1-star rated CMF. So there's some kind of issues with these in terms of reliability. So I'm going to go look at just one of them to see a little bit more about that. As I mentioned, I can pull up the details about the star rating. I'm going to go ahead and do that just to see why did this get this kind of low rating. So I can see the study design was poor. It was not a study design that was robust. Sample size was poor, which meant it had a very limited sample. Apparently, its standard error was excellent in that the statistical read on this had a low standard error, but there were some possible bias issues there. We see a fair there, and then the data source score was poor, so it had a fairly limited range of geographic locations that they studied. So I can see there are some issues with this, and in fact, if I scroll down to see a little bit more about it, down here in the development details, I can see that in the sample size area, this particular CMF was based on one site. So very limited in the type of reliability of what you might see in the results. So I'm thinking, yeah, that's definitely why they're seeing this kind of result. There was probably maybe just 1 or 2 crashes, and in the after period that they studied, there were none, and so you saw a complete elimination of crashes. But it's a very limited sample, not a lot of reliability in that. So to address you out there who submitted this countermeasure, I wanted to just offer this, that if you look at that graphic, we can see that this treatment, the J-turn, to me, I knew was a somewhat sort of regional term for things, and so these types of configurations might also have other names. So I'm going to look at something that involves U-turns. Since this configuration obviously involves a lot of U-turning traffic, I'm going to think, well, there might be something else that might apply to this situation that would involve U-turns. And in fact, he's looking at it getting away from a signalization option. So I'm going to look for U-turns and see what might be available there. Okay, so I can see a couple different categories come up. Intersection geometry seems to have the most number of CMFs. I'm going to look in there. This one particularly, replacing the direct left turn with a right turn plus a U-turn, is very much what the J-turn configuration is doing, and so I'm going to look under there to see what might be available there. When I did that, I saw that there were a lot of fairly high-rated, 3 and above rated CMFs that were available here. And in fact, the indications, I can see that a fair number of them were actually included in the HSM. So HSM Part D would have these CMFs in there. And actually, if you go and look at the details of these, they were developed for stop-controlled intersections, which is what this gentleman was dealing with. And so these would be fairly appropriate for that situation. You won't look at the roadway types and that sort of thing, but these would be pretty close to, I think, his situation. So that's something to consider there. And if you wanted to know a little bit more about that, you could click on this reference and pull up the study and look at some of the details about the study and perhaps see the study report. We're not always able to post the study report. Sometimes if we're reviewing a TRB paper, that's not something we can link to or provide because of copywriting issues and such, as well as other professional journals. But when it's an TRB report or FHWA or state, and they do post it online, we can link to that and allow you to see the study for yourself. The last one I wanted to address was another scenario submitted to us that involved bicycle lanes and super elevation. So the situation that this gentleman had was a section of roadway, 2-lane road, had 2 foot shoulders, and along this road he had two very sharp curves. The crash history that they saw involved runoff road accidents and also two vehicle on bicycle overtaking accidents that were fairly serious. And so they're looking at addressing both of these types of situations. And so he said, we're proposing shoulder widening to allow marking of 6-foot bike lanes, so he's looking at bicycle lanes there, and also modifying super elevation on the curves to presumably address the runoff road crashes. So he was simply asking what CMFs might apply here. So I just kind of wanted to walk through, okay, if you're going to go into the CMF Clearinghouse and try to find results for this situation, we've got kind of two things here. We've got the bicycle lanes and we've got the super elevation. So I'm going to look for bicycle lanes first. I'm going to go bicycle lane, again looking in the countermeasure to get specifically what I'm looking for. I see that there's 5 different countermeasures. The last 4 have to do with intersections. This one doesn't, the top one, so I'm going to look at that. And I see we've got some 3-star rated, some 2-star rated CMFs in here. If I look at the top one, that addresses all crashes, so all types of crashes that are occurring there. It's actually showing a slight increase there, 5%. Looks like it's for an urban area, which I'm not sure if that would apply as much to this particular person's scenario. They didn't indicate what type of area they're dealing with, but it sounds like it's a little bit more of a rural situation. So some question as to whether or not you'd really want to apply that there, but again, we're going to kind of see what's out there. Go back to my notes on this one. So we see that for all crashes, 1.05. If I want to look maybe specifically at vehicle-bicycle crashes, since he did say that they were particularly interested in addressing that situation, I can scroll down here. I see that there were some CMFs. Looks like they're all from this same study, Jensen, in 2008. 1.49 is the CMF they're getting for bicycle crashes. So that actually shows an increase for bicycle crashes. Sounds kind of maybe counterintuitive. If you're installing bike lanes, you're seeing an increase in bike crashes. I do see that it's a 2-star rated CMF, so there's some question as to the reliability of that. I'm also going to go look at this study, and in fact, if you pull up that study link, this is a study out of Denmark where they did a study. So, you know, that might also factor into your decision as, you know, how applicable you think the situation in urban Denmark is to the rural area, perhaps, that you're dealing with in this scenario. But we can see as you scroll on down that the only ones we've got about bicycle lanes in the clearinghouse are from this one study. I went to the HSM to look about bicycle lanes, and basically the knowledge on the crash-based knowledge on bicycle lanes right now is somewhat limited. I'll pull the plug. If you've done a study, a crash-based study on bicycle lanes, and you've got some CMFs you've produced, please send them to us, because most of what we've got right now is from one study out of Denmark. So I'd like to see a little bit more and try to get some more reliable CMFs about bicycle lanes in there. The other one that he put out that he was interested in was super elevation changes and what might be the crash effect of that. So I'm going to do a search. And I knew this was the result, but I wanted to show you anyways that we don't have any CMFs with star ratings right now for super elevation. So we are highly dependent on what the state of knowledge is right now in the safety field. If you see at the bottom, additional advanced search results, there were 8 CMFs returned that do not have star ratings. Sean mentioned 4,000 CMFs in the clearinghouse. That's close to the number there, but not all of those are star rated. In fact, many are not. This is because, and if I go to look at this link, if I go here, I'm now in the search results for those that did not have star ratings. And I can expand that out to look at those CMFs. Some of the CMFs that come up there say, okay, CMF of 0.6, but it says cannot be rated. This is because some of our initial CMFs in the clearinghouse came from, if you recall, those compilation documents from years past, and those were a lot of times were based on surveys of state agencies to say what CMFs are you using for improving super elevation or whatever it may be, and compiling those together. So they were not based on a particular research study that we could rate, that we could give a star rating to. And so we're still including them because that knowledge is out there. We want to make it available, but we do want to indicate that it's not star rated. We can't give you a good read on what the reliability of that is. So these are available. This gentleman may be interested in using these for the estimate of what improving super elevation would be, but but just know that these are not something that we could have vetted through really a critical review process. Okay, so just want to go through a couple demonstration items there, and certainly if you've got questions, please submit them on the chat box, and I will answer your questions best I can, post that answer up after the webinar. But right now I want to go ahead and hand it on back to Karen to wrap us up here.
Great. Thank you, Daniel and Sean, for a great presentation on how to better use the CMF Clearinghouse and the many, many CMFs that are available to everyone. If you would like to continue this CMF learning adventure, I would encourage you to sign up for the CMF Clearinghouse newsletter. It's called a CMF Update, and if you are on that mailing list, you should have just recently, within the past week or so, received the most recent version of that, and you can sign up for this newsletter on the CMF Clearinghouse website, or I'm sure we'll offer this opportunity in any follow-up communication that we send out to you guys. Daniel mentioned the NHI course Science of Crash. It's actually now Crash Modification Factors. So there are two training courses that we have available through the National Highway Institute. The first is the application of crash modification factors, and the science of crash modification factors is the second one. These are both web-based courses, so they include components of self-paced instruction as well as a web conference session. And NHI will be offering both of these courses once each during the months January through April. So there'll be 4 offerings of each of these courses. So I would encourage you to visit the NHI website to learn more about these courses and to register for these courses while you're there. I think as the titles imply, the application of CMF course really focuses on how to apply CMFs in the safety management process, and then the science of CMF course really focuses on how to assess the quality of CMF. So getting to that applicability, how applicable is the CMF to your particular scenario, and it walks you through a couple of case studies. We recently updated the Science of CMF course, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it. So I would encourage you all to take advantage of the opportunity that NHI is offering over the next couple of months. We also, if these courses don't meet your needs, let us know. We'll be hosting annual webinars on the CMF Clearinghouse, and we welcome your input on future webinar topics. We also always have the door open to any feedback or input you might have on the CMF Clearinghouse functionality or information that's in the CMF Clearinghouse. We are continuously enhancing the Clearinghouse, and we use your input to identify and prioritize these enhancements. So I think the next biggest enhancement that you might see is an enhanced search feature coming down the road, so keep an eye out for that. You can send your thoughts directly to me. My contact information is available on the CMF Clearinghouse website, and I believe Daniel has it here somewhere in the presentation for you too. Those are the CMF-related wrap-up items. On the administrative side, a couple of things are going to happen after the end of today's webinar. The first thing is when you exit the webinar, there will be a very brief survey that will pop up. We would very much appreciate your feedback on our performance through that survey. This will help us as we plan future webinars to know what you thought about today and anything that we can do better next time. And then within a couple of days, you should receive a follow-up email with a link to download a printable certificate of attendance for 1.5 hours of instruction. If there are multiple attendees at your site, you can forward this link to the other participants so that they can download and print the certificate with their name on it. And then lastly, there will be a link to a recording of today's webinar, the PowerPoint presentation, and any answers to questions that we received in the chat box. We'll be posting them within the next 2 weeks, so probably when you get back from your holiday break, that information should be available. And there's my contact information. Thank you, Daniel. So I thank you all for joining us today. We wish you all a safe and happy holiday. Thank you.